Hi, everyone. Welcome. Good evening, good morning, good almost lunchtime, wherever you are. Thank you so much for joining the second of our developer webinar series for our RFP. We had our first on Tuesday, focused on mangroves. This webinar is focused on reforestation and agroforestry projects. My name is Julia Strong. I'm the founder and executive director of Symbiosis Coalition, and really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. And thank you so much to those of you who submitted questions ahead of time. We'll do our best to answer those through the presentation itself. But if you have additional questions, please don't hesitate to drop them in the Q&A. We'll be monitoring that throughout the presentation and throughout the webinar and trying to answer those as we go. And if there are additional questions that we don't get to for this time, don't worry, we'll be collecting those and trying to answer those through various different platforms, whether that's through the FAQs that you can find on the Available platform, or if you email us afterwards, we'll try to respond there as well. But as always, check out our FAQs first to see if we've already answered that question, and we'll try to get your questions answered. So with that, looking forward to today's call. On the call today, we have myself, Ratnika Prasad, our Director of Operations, Paulo Quadri, our Technical Lead, and Ellie Rakoff, our Technical Fellow. Today, we'll cover an overview of Symbiosis, our overview of our quality criteria and the updates related to reforestation and agroforestry. We'll give you an overview of the RFP, including what's the eligibility, how to apply, some of the basics in terms of documentation that we'll be submitting. We'll then go into what reviewers are looking for and some lessons from our first RFP, and then leave some time for Q&A at the end. So to start, just giving a context on Symbiosis Coalition, many of you are familiar with our work, but for those of you who are new to it and some asked questions ahead of time as to who is Symbiosis and what are we doing, we're a coalition of buyers dedicated to catalyzing the next generation of nature-based carbon removal projects that the world needs to meet its ambitious climate goals. We know that uncertainty of demand and uncertainty about what good looks like has held the market back, so we're aiming to send a strong demand signal followed by long-term offtake agreements that can help to catalyze the billions of dollars of investment that are going to be needed to scale these projects. We're trying to do for nature what power purchase agreements did for the renewable energy sector in terms of unlocking the financing needed for these projects. So we do 4 things to catalyze this next generation of projects and help to grow the market. First, we have this action-oriented offtake commitment. All of our buyers make a commitment to purchase Symbiosis-aligned projects, go under contract for those projects by 2030. Second, we have a unified quality criteria, so helping developers understand what are buyers looking for and helping buyers understand what are the latest standards and quality criteria based in the latest science and data and best practice. So we work with experts, including our technical advisory board, to craft that and to build on existing standards and frameworks in the market to help to clarify what are we looking to purchase. Third, we have a joint RFP that's intended to streamline the process for buyers and for developers to reduce the burden of these involved processes, as well as to translate our offtake commitment into actual signed agreements. And third, we have market development. So we're aiming to share what we're doing transparently, share lessons learned, share guidance to help the next generation of projects, whether they're RFP ready now or later, help them understand what we're looking for and how to help more buyers, more investors, and more developers to act in support of our climate goals. We are now focused on reforestation, agroforestry, and mangrove projects. We launched our first RFP at the end of 2024, and we're working last year to go from 0 to 1 on building the infrastructure, evaluating the first sets of projects, and announcing the first offtakes from that. And we're excited to be talking about our latest RFP on this webinar. Just a bit more about that first RFP was really focused on growing the initial project pipeline. We received applications from all over the world with 185 complete applications reviewed. 52 of those projects advanced through intermediate diligence, and we can still continue to advance projects through fill diligence from that first RFP, as well as going through the contracting process. So we hope to announce more projects soon. A big learning from that first RFP was that the scale of the potential is enormous. It's probably not surprising for those of you on this webinar. It's really amazing to see the breadth and the scale of potential impact. If we were successful in supporting all the projects that came through, it would be reforesting an area the size of Costa Rica, and we know that there are more projects out there than that too. A key learning, though, was that projects were early. For the most part, these are projects that are not issuing credits, that are even in the earlier stages, may not have even a PDD or just a feasibility study. And so that's something we've tried to refine in this next RFP, is to clarify what stage of projects are we looking for and point earlier stage projects to resources that can help them to get there. Some common strengths and areas for improvement that we saw, these ranged from foundational issues where carbon finance was actually not the right fit for projects. There were structural issues, it's not ecologically appropriate, or these are not additional projects, to mitigable issues that could be addressed through project design or through more demonstrated projects. So some of the key strengths included strong commitments to ecological impact. A number of projects scored well against the ecological integrity quality pillar. And we saw, and we're really, really pleased to see, a comprehensive stakeholder engagement and benefit sharing plans paired with meaningful experience in the region. As Paulo will talk about, a really key part of what we look for. Second, in terms of areas for improvement, there were uncertainties in the carbon projection and baseline calculations, often due to the particular data sets that were chosen or just the lack of available data. And so, we hope that over time, as more projects are supported, as more research is focused in this area, those data gaps can be filled. Another one that we often saw was that there was not a clear theory of change, so a clear explanation for how the project would support a sustainable forest transition beyond the carbon project timeline to help ensure durability, so that the forest that's being established or reestablished would last beyond the carbon project to be a durable project. So these are just some examples of areas that we saw consistently, and we'll be aiming to share even more lessons learned in the future. So to dive into our approach to quality, which is central to everything we do, we ultimately aim to contract with projects that shine a light on projects that result in real, durable, lasting climate impact, that are based on the latest science and data and best practices to ensure that we're having the impact that we intend to. So essentially, we aim to create a positive feedback loop to drive these high integrity projects, acknowledging that science, data, and best practice will evolve over time. We see our role as taking in through our technical advisory board and with our work with other experts across the market, whether that's practitioners, NGOs, ratings agencies, academics, et cetera, better understand what is the latest science and best practices, use that to inform project type specific quality criteria, then use that to translate into a project evaluation, into our diligence process, through which we identify projects. And through those identified projects and through that process, we surface lessons learned to then inform, hopefully, feedback into science, data, best practice, and updated standards over time. So our technical advisory board is key to defining and helping us to adopt our quality criteria, looking again across what standards exist on the market, identifying which ones represent the most conservative and latest approaches, and helping us to clarify where are there gaps because of the nature of the project-specific evaluations we're doing and the ex-ante evaluations we're doing. We're looking at projects that have not yet implemented at scale, and so, or are not yet necessarily issuing credits yet, or soon to issue credits. So we want to make sure that we're really being thoughtful about what are the specific nuances of evaluating those projects. And so as you can see on the screen, these are experts that range from different institutions, different backgrounds, disciplines, to really help us holistically shape the quality criteria. And we have a set of quality pillars that build on the ICVCM's core carbon principles and other guidance to really help guide our definition of high integrity projects. So first of all, conservative accounting, using the latest approaches to carbon accounting, baselining additionality and leakage to provide high certainty of real climate mitigation, taking a conservative approach. So understanding that as data evolves and changes, we hope that we can be that our approach is still lasting through that. Durability is the second pillar. So we want to create the conditions for lasting impact while monitoring, accounting for, and supporting mechanisms to fully compensate for any reversals. Social and community benefits is the third pillar. So engaging local communities and Indigenous peoples from project design all the way through implementation and ensuring equitable compensation for those communities. We also see this as a critical component of durability and the lasting climate impact. Without engaged communities from the design all the way through implementation who are bought in and benefiting equitably from the project, these won't be lasting projects. So we really see them as co-drivers of impact rather than co-benefits as they've traditionally been described. Fourth, ecological integrity. So making sure that these interventions are ecologically appropriate and that they can lead to positive biodiversity outcomes where possible. And transparency, so enabling a third-party evaluation of these projects to understand what's working and what's not, and to share those lessons learned over time. So our quality criteria are sort of the next step down from these quality pillars, really intended to be specific enough to be actionable, but high level enough that they can apply across geographies, across project contexts, which we know are so specific to each individual project. Each of the quality criteria ties back to one or more of the 5 symbiosis quality pillars to demonstrate how often these criteria touch on and advance these different elements of the project, and they're best thought of not necessarily in isolation, but in concert with one another. As I mentioned, we're really trying to be able to update these as and when the science evolves, but want to make sure that we're setting enough of a high level approach so that it's durable, so that we're not constantly changing or moving the targets of what we're looking for, that we're really reserving changes where there's need for clarification or where there's major updates to the science. We know that it's challenging when the target is moving. And so we want to make sure for developers, for investors, for buyers. So we want to try to make these as consistent as possible. So in light of that, we did recently announce our updated quality criteria, in which we did provide some additional clarifications or emphasis or some refinements to elements of the agroforestry and reforestation quality criteria, and we also expanded to include mangroves. The biggest change that you may notice is that now the quality criteria are not necessarily here's the project criteria for mangroves and here's the project criteria for reforestation and agroforestry. We wanted to demonstrate that the tenets of a high integrity project for nature-based carbon removal apply across ecosystems and really call out that project type specific nuance where necessary. But the things that we did add clarifications for or additional specific guidance on are listed here on data and modeling transparency, quantification and project and control plots and key carbon pools like soil organic carbon. We explicitly called out leakage mitigation hierarchy, which is first to mitigate leakage and then apply appropriate deductions. The next update we had was clarity on ex ante reversal risk estimations and integration into project design, financial transparency and benefit sharing, and then also additional specification around seed and seedling sourcing for active reforestation, as well as additional guidance on species selection. So we're hopeful that that will be helpful to the developers who we receive questions from, and to give more clarity to the market as to what we're looking for. And with that, I will hand it over to Ratnika, who will walk us through the process of applying to the RFP, eligibility criteria, what we're looking for as a starting point. Thanks, Ratnika.
Thank you,
And I'll
Julia.
spotlight you in 1 second. Here we go.
Great. Thanks, Julia, and thanks, everyone. It's really exciting to see so much engagement, even just on the Q&A right now with all of you. Just to give you start off with a quick overview of the RFP, our approach is to provide a 10-year pay-on-delivery offtake agreement noting that there is a pre-purchase track, but it's only for mangroves, so not relevant for reforestation and agroforestry. Our process consists of 6 steps, starting with the eligibility, which we would highly encourage you to go and test out on the available platform, since that answers a lot of the questions that we often receive from you. It's just 2 minutes. You can check for as many projects as you like. Following eligibility, we have a qualitative screening, a geospatial screening, and then an intermediate diligence where we'll be asking you a few targeted questions. If you reach the full diligence stage, then we will then proceed to conduct a site visit, and you'll be paired with one of our full diligence providers, which for this round are Carbon Direct, Silva, B0, and Silvestrum TerraCarbon as a joint entity. Our expectation is to move the first batch of projects to intermediate diligence in May, and to then advance them to full diligence starting in June. Next slide, please. And so this current RFP is really a reflection of a lot of learning that we've had as a Symbiosis team, and a reflection of a lot of the feedback we've heard from you all. And so as we try to continually improve our process, we've made several changes that will hopefully make this a smoother and much easier process for all of you. First of all, this is a rolling RFP. We want to emphasize that there is no deadline, because what we really want is to give projects the best possible chance of success that they have. And the big way to do so is to apply as and when your project is ready and it's well aligned with our quality criteria and it meets all of the eligibility. And so hopefully, if you look at the criteria and you're eligible now, please do apply. But if your pilot isn't ready, or if there's another issue, which means that you would be ready 6 months from now, we would encourage you to apply then. And hopefully this will also reduce the number of rejections based on projects being too early stage, which we noted was a key feature of last time. I would also note that we've reduced the amount of information we ask for upfront. And so the eligibility check is a 2-minute process, but even subsequent stages only ask for the information that is really needed at that stage for us to be able to move you ahead to the next stage. We've heard from you that you would like better communication of status during the RFP. And so we've engaged Debatable's platform so that there's a clear tracker that lets you know where you are in the process and what comes next. And finally, for those who applied previously to our first RFP, understanding that your projects have often evolved and are now ready for a Symbiosis offtake, we will do our best to use previous diligence information wherever possible. At the same time, projects evolve very quickly, so we understand that your pilot may have since progressed, your carbon model may have evolved, and we want to give you the chance to submit new documentation that best reflects your status at the time. Next slide, please. And so we've tried our best to establish some clear but very crucial for us eligibility criteria. You will not be able to advance to the screening stage of the RFP on the platform and complete the next sections if your submission does not meet these requirements. And part of our rationale here is that we know RFPs can be burdensome, so we really only want developers to apply once they're ready, and also only want developers to apply when they have a chance of moving ahead. The eligibility check is a no penalty check. You can submit as many projects as you would like that meet these eligibility criteria. At a high level, and we share a lot more of this detail in our FAQs and our readiness checklist, our eligibility focuses on number one, project stage. We can only look at projects that are post feasibility with at minimum a draft BDD and a pilot area. Project types within reforestation and agroforestry. This includes agroforestry, working forest, conservation-oriented projects, which can both include direct planting as well as assisted natural regeneration. We've received a lot of questions from developers, including in today's Q&A, about afforestation. So just noting that Paulo will be walking through that in detail in a few slides from now. We have a minimum volume requirement, so we can only look at projects that have a minimum of at least 100,000 tons offered over the 10-year offtake. We can only look at projects that are ICDCM CCP approved methodologies. On geographies, it has to be a place where we can do a site visit and that meets our ecological integrity quality criteria. on ecological appropriateness. And then we have a few requirements that are really meant to set you up for success. So we look for basic documentation, files, and so on. And then finally, we have a minimum viable pilot size that we consider. Once again, before I leave this, I would really urge you to use the eligibility check on the available platform, as it's the clearest way in which you can check if your project meets the criteria or not. There's no penalty. You can submit as many projects to the eligibility check as you desire, and we will not be looking at the ones that got disqualified. We'll only look at the ones that move ahead. Next slide, please. And so to try to demystify a little bit how exactly we evaluate projects, for us, it's really a focus on quality. And specifically, that breaks down into a few things. First and foremost, a successful submission would go beyond just alignment with the quality criteria. The main dimensions they would consider are ability to execute, like we really look at the quality of the developer and their actual track record on the ground, including the pilot, the evidence of their land pipeline, the partnerships that they've built on the ground, and the track record of their financing. Because ultimately, what we want to assess is the ability of the project to successfully scale and successfully execute. Second of all, we look at the commercial proposal. We get a lot of questions from all of you on whether or not we have a target price. And just to be clear, we do not. What we do evaluate project by project is the competitiveness of that proposal. So we will go deep into evaluating the key drivers of the project cost, the pricing, the understand the alignment for the minimum quality criteria, the adequacy of the resources you put into the financial model, etc. A big one here too is we will understand and make sure that there's a fair share of benefits that happens with the stakeholders in the project. A big one we've seen come up recently, just to flag for all of you as well, would be understanding what, if any, share there is for the government, as we see that be a big piece in financial models. We also look at a combination of these factors with diversification across geography, the risk profile of different projects, and whether or not they represent a scalable and replicable model. So on the whole, it's a very multi-factor analysis that we do. Next slide. So moving ahead to the kind of resources that are available for you, we've tried our best to really answer as many questions as possible. This webinar is obviously one source of that, but we would urge you to please look at our quality criteria in detail and look at the FAQs. A lot of the questions that you all have today are covered in these. Next slide. Finally, as Paulo likes to say, the readiness checklist is your best friend. What we do in the readiness checklist is go into details on all of the documentation that we will be asking for and really try to use it as a way to help you understand what kind of things we will be looking for in your carbon model, for example, in your financial model, for example. Next slide. This time, we have changed the approach slightly by adding a couple of innovations. So we've built a carbon model cover sheet and a financial model cover sheet that I'll go through next. And to be clear, the idea here is not to force fit your models into some kind of Symbiosis template. We understand that models are very project and context specific. However, because there are key pieces of information that we need to look at in every project, the carbon model cover sheet is really just meant to be a single tab that you can add to your existing model. And the questions that we ask in that tab can just be linked to wherever in the model you've answered those. So really for us, it's meant to be a quick source of consistent information that we can assess project by project. And for you, it's hopefully a very quick add to just put in that template and link it to these detailed pieces of information that we know you've built in the model. For the carbon model, this includes major implementation assumptions, understanding how you've done your deductions and the pools you're considering, and most importantly, what your carbon removal curve looks like. Next slide. The financial model cover sheet is very similar. It's meant to be an add-on to your model. It's not meant to replace your model. The main things we are trying to understand here is your delivery schedule as it relates to the rest of your financial model. So this is really a way for us to assess your price, understand how you reach that price, understand how that translates into your delivery year by year, your implementation, specifically your land pipeline and its status, major buckets of cost, major buckets of revenue sharing, and then finally the investor and developer economics. And this is, again, coming from a place of transparency. We're not trying to hit some kind of target benchmark, but really just understand your project economics as a whole. Next step. Finally, we understand that there might be very promising projects in your portfolio that are simply too early for the Symbiosis RFP. And as part of our broader mission to grow the market as a whole, we provide a couple of additional resources that can support you even if the Symbiosis RFP is not ready for you. First of all, we have a database of investors who are active in the nature-based space and who are actively interested in financing carbon projects. This comes from the Symbiosis RFP. If you are interested in approaching any of these, please feel free to do so directly. We have their information in this database. If you're an investor and you're interested in joining this call, we also encourage you to visit this page and register so that we can add you to the database. Second of all, we have non-financial resources that we list on our website as well. So we get a lot of questions about technical assistance and other resources for early stage projects. And if your organization isn't quite ready for the RFP, but is seeking resources to better position yourself in the future, please refer to this database. There are lots of organizations out there who actively work with early stage projects that would be interested in helping you out. Next slide. Finally, running through document requirements, as I mentioned earlier, the readiness checklist is really the main resource to bear in mind, and it goes in detail for each of these documents. One of the key things to know is that we, in an effort to lighten the burden for you, do not ask for all of these documents all at once. In the screening process, we ask for a very basic set of documents as listed here. That's really meant to help us advance your project to intermediate diligence. And then in intermediate diligence, based on the specific context of your project, we will be asking for some, but not necessarily all of the documents listed here. So this is really meant to give you a sense of the kind of documents that we will be asking for and why, but noting that you don't need to have all of these ready beyond the screening documents mentioned here. Next slide. Finally, just to mention how you would apply, we've partnered with Available to make this process as smooth as possible for you. It should only take you a few minutes to set up an account. It's completely free. And then, as we've said before, we would remind you again that the eligibility check was really made for your benefit. It is very short, just 2 minutes. You can check if your project's eligible, and if your project is disqualified, you can submit a second instance. We will not judge the disqualifications, and you do not need to edit or modify the disqualified project. You can simply apply once again. And so, next slide, please. As you begin your submission, you will see that the navigation of the process matches the process flow that we showed you previously in terms of the stages of diligence. In addition to all the resources we've mentioned, which are linked in the Available platform itself, we would also note that there are a couple of other important resources to guide you. One, Available has an FAQ on the right-hand side that you should feel free to use. It mentions all of the Symbiosis FAQs, plus a few more details about specific document submissions. And then secondly, there's a chat feature there, which directly connects you to the Available team. Depending on your question or issue, they will either resolve the issue you're having or they'll send it on to us if it's a quality question, and we'll do our best to answer these as promptly as possible. Please note that this feature also includes language translation. So in the upper right corner, you can change the language to either Spanish, French, or Portuguese. With that, I'm going to hand over to Paulo to discuss next what we're looking for in projects.
Great. Thank you, Ratnika. I think I'm unmuted. Yes, and everyone can see me here. Great. Well, thanks again, everyone, for being here and for all your very important and sharp questions in the chat. We'll try to respond to all of those if possible. So what are we looking for? I'm going to walk through the next slides. I'm going to take some time to try to explain, sort of add some clarity and some more visibility into how we think when we are doing project evaluation. And hopefully this will also answer a lot of the questions that you have or you've been sending to us. Next slide, please. So what are some of the common characteristics of the projects that are most aligned with Symbiosis quality criteria and likely to advance? Um, so uh, Before I dive into some of those specifics, though, I want to try to provide some more, as I was saying, some more structural clarity to how we translate or how we move from quality criteria that is at high level to actual project evaluation. Um, and so to do this, we've sort of like came up with this just conceptual framework that has four components. And essentially what it does is that it helps us navigate a project from those elements or components that are less mitigable, so or that are unmutable, to those that are more mitigable. And when I say that, I'm talking about what is happening, in the time frame that a project is presented to us. So, during the diligence process and what is happening in those months. And and this framework also it's kind of very particular or specific to the job that we have to do at Symbiosis, which is that we are taking projects that are for the most part at an early stage, and we're trying to make predictions about whether the project will be successful short term and then long term, and whether the proponent is actually going to be able to deliver. That is different to looking at a project that has been happening already for a number of years, where you can have, you already have data about what is working, what is not working, right? So I just want to clarify that. So I'll walk us through some what this method looks like a bit more detail. Next, please. All right, so this is sort of like that pyramid that you saw, but now we're like laying it down here. And again, this is important to think of. These are four different components, but it's really more like a gradient where different elements of a project will fall within these components along these sequence or gradient between things that are less mitigable to more mitigable. Again during a specific time frame. So what are foundational things that are non-mitigable? So these are not going to change, right? These have to do mostly with the project geography and the location, and I'll walk into some of these more specifically right now. But things like the albedo offset risk, or whether you have favorable or local policies, safe working conditions, ecological and demographic or socioeconomic aspects of the location, infrastructure that is built there. That is not going to change. That is what describes your baseline, to say it in different words, right? Like you have to now respond to that location in a very specific way. So then we have a structural component, and these are the things that now do pertain to the project, but that are, they support the house. Like if some of these things are not in place, it is likely that the house will collapse. So these are things like stakeholder engagement, the appropriate landowner contracts or the agreements that are in place as part of this engagement. Very importantly, the project and intervention types. So what kind of project you have decided that is the best fit for this location, a benefit sharing plan and safeguard strategy. So those are things that take time and will vary a lot depending on the project type, right? Like depending on things like land tenure. I'll get into that in a bit, but these need to be in place, right? Without these foundations of trust, then things can break down easily. And then we move into an area that more about implementation, which have to do with experience and delivery capacity, or the specifics about the implementation design that is in that you're going to do with those interventions, access to finance. And then, as you keep moving forward, things become a bit more mitigable in that time frame. So you have things about like the specific deductions in baselines or leakage or your forest management plans, the decisions about stocking index or the MRV plan, which are rolling more into the future. Now, again, this doesn't mean that they're not important or that they don't have to be finalized already by the time that we would contract, that we would end. It's just are just things that this helps us understand what are things that there's no way we can change. Like this project makes no sense because of there's a foundational or a structural issue, right? Versus things that we might be able to change. Next, please. All right, so let's talk about geography and suitability, right? So these are the foundational components, and I'll keep following. You can on the right upper corner there, you can follow sort of like the sequence where they belong into, and also the quality pillars that they are related to. So in this case, like our social and economic safeguards and community benefits and the ecological integrity of a project. So from a biophysical suitability perspective, things that are very important are, for example, biomass productivity, right? Are you choosing to develop a project in an area that is productive? So trees are going to grow fast, or is it going to be more a seasonal environment? So that determines what kind of things you can do. Or are you going to do is our albedo offset risk high, right? And therefore, you have to respond with a specific intervention to try to avoid changing the reflectivity of the land so that you can manage your climate impact in that sense. Leakage and non-additionality risk, this is where you have to start thinking about these things, right? If you are in an area, you chose in an area that is agriculturally productive, well, then you might be increasing your leakage risk. It doesn't mean that you cannot manage it. I'll get into that. Or conversely, if you are choosing an area that is more marginal, but then you have land abandonment happening and background natural regeneration, then you might need to take some baseline deductions. Disturbance regime, are you in an area that is fire prone? And so you actually have to have a fire management plan, or also, again, modify your interventions. You're not going to be able to change that. Or same with land use degradation, right? Uh, Similarly, with political and institutional suitability, do you have a well-defined legal and regulatory framework, safety conditions to operate on and to work, and very importantly, the land tenure type and the local and cultural institutions of our region? That will define that. Do you have to do a project that you has to enroll hundreds or thousands of smallholder farmers, or do you have to acquire two large properties, right? And so that will basically define, cascade down into all the other components. Next, please. All right, so before I go into intervention types, so one thing that I know has been a question, a common question, and just want to clarify that. Afforestation is excluded from Symbiosis RFP. And we define afforestation as sort of like the establishment of tree cover that results in closed canopy forest, defined using the definition of WRI and Potapov 2022, of at least 5 meters in canopy in height and 20 to 25% of canopy cover at 30-meter resolution. So, and I know that definitions of forests are problematic for many reasons, but this is what we are adhering to right now. But we're adding some color that hopefully is going to be helpful here. So on lands where closed canopy forest is not the ecologically appropriate native state, and this is a very important aspect, as determined by pre-industrial vegetation baselines. So what does it mean? This means that essentially, trying to simplify this, is like we want to see the right intervention in the right place. So it doesn't mean that you cannot have a project that is restoring woodlands, right? Just because they might not be classified as forest proper. It's more that if you're working in woodlands, then we don't want to see a project that is proposing to increase canopy cover in a way that would not be mimicking sort of like as much as possible the original structure and function of that ecosystem. And so one of the things I would encourage you is if you're unsure like what kind of biome and ecoregion your project is located on, you can always go to the World Wildlife Fund ecoregion maps that will tell you a little bit more about, okay, what should I be thinking here from an ecological integrity perspective. Most commercial plantations will fall under this definition of afforestation, and those are excluded from symbiosis, and also for other reasons related to non-additionality risk. Okay, next, please. All right, so diving a bit more into project type and appropriate interventions here. This it's one of the most important structural aspects of any project. Again, because it has to respond to those foundational elements that I was describing. And essentially, we ask two high-level questions, right? Is the project a good fit for the local conditions, and how will carbon stay in the landscape long term? Um, this, from an intervention design, this is where you start thinking about additionality, baselines, and leakage. This is where all that impact is really brewing for the first time. What kind of activities and interventions are ecologically and socially appropriate to maximize impact? Um, and so I put that diagram there. I know it's a bit small, but I would encourage you to visit this paper by Meli, Benayas, and Brancalion in 2019, because it really summarizes why are we restoring for, right? And so it describes what is the focus of restoration or reforestation. Are we trying to think of biodiversity conservation? And so we want to think of things about like forest structure and function, or are we thinking more about ecosystem services? And so then what forest types we want? We want productive forests or agroforests that are doing achieving human needs, or conservation forests that are achieving biodiversity needs. And then what kind of interventions are we thinking of? Silviculture or agroforestry or mixed species plantations for like small scale forestry, for example, or assisted natural regeneration or reforestation with native trees. And these can be summarized. This is where things start appearing as are you doing mostly a land sharing project, right? That it's intermixing carbon with other uses of the land? Or are you doing mostly a land sparing process where you're taking a big area and you're doing reforestation there and then leaving other activities in other parts of the landscape? And that matters a lot. It matters because, again, these are the things that will essentially define whether your baselines will be, one will have a certain characteristics or whether leakage risk would be a problem or not. So this is the fit of the project. Now, the other part that is very important is how will carbon stay on the landscape long term, right? And this is why choosing the right intervention matters a lot, because depending, are you going to use direct and monetary economic incentives based on carbon or based on some timber that might be produced or non-timber forest products? Are you going to use, is the project going to be attractive to landowners because of enhanced ecosystem services? And that is what will encourage adoption at the beginning. And then, or you might use formal and legal protection to protect that carbon long term, right? Depending on where you are. Or are you hoping that low future land use change pressure will be the case because of demographic changes, right? Or all those things together. So what is the vision of durability is basically established at this stage. Next slide, please. Okay, so stakeholder engagement and governance are things that are structural and obviously very, very important. But depending on what elements you might be able to start, you might be able to edit some things. This is a process that is constructed over time, and so things, obviously can change in an adaptive way. But without a stakeholder engagement and a benefit sharing plan and the right legal frameworks and safeguards in place, and again, it also depends on what project type you are doing. These are things that really can be modified too much, right? So the appropriate and an appropriate and inclusive stakeholder engagement and governance plan is always critical. And again, as I was saying, depending on the land tenure and cultural landscape you're working on, this might look very different. These are the cornerstones of any project. Without this, the project is at risk of collapsing. How do you know, for example, it also will allow you to ask, how do you know that the project will be successful and adopted successfully and that will last, beyond the first years of a project? What data and knowledge is supporting this? Did you conducted consultations or surveys with people or with landowners? It's understanding how people think in this particular area. It becomes really important. Same with and obviously having benefit sharing plans that are fair and transparent, right? That we can tell by either desk review or by going to the field that everyone is very, very clear on what are the exact things that need to be done, and that are the commitments that people are committing to. Similarly with land and legal frameworks, right? So transparent and clear legal agreements that are easy to interpret for everyone, right? In the right languages, in the right words, especially when you have areas that are potentially culturally different or where the markets are just not part of the culture. These things become very important. And then ensuring that the project aligns with best practices in terms of safeguarding. These are also not just things that are for co-benefit purposes, but will drive the project success and durability. Next, please. Pilot and proof of concepts are also very, very important from a diligence perspective. And the reason why is because a pilot allows us to see everything that I was describing just now. Is how much experience do you have in the region, how much experience your partners has, how many hypotheses have you tested, right? Or things that could go wrong. We define pilot as sort of like any prior implementation of an area that is within the same location, same ecosystem, same land tenure of the project, representative of the intervention design, so it has to be very similar, relatively recent. Older pilots can be insightful too. I'll mention more a bit about this. And it may or may not be included in Symbiosis Offtake, but we prefer that it's included in Symbiosis Offtake because it's telling us it's already contributing towards the goal of the project. A more recent pilot is going to be very helpful to understand operations and logistical capacity and things that are related to what is happening right now in that area, right? Restoration supply chains, etc. An older pilot that you have is going to tell us more about the trajectories of an ecosystem or an agro ecosystem and what happens over time with it and whether people have continued to adopt it and understand it. So in an ideal world, we would have areas that we can see that have different timelines. But we understand that in most cases, a pilot might just be what was done last year or the previous 2 years, and that is extremely helpful. The key questions that we want to ask about a pilot is it representing the complexity of a project both in scale and variability of the intervention types and the operational and logistical requirements. So if you are thinking that a project is going to be 100,000 acres or hectares, well, that's fine, right? But what that means is that you need a larger test here. You need a representative pilot of what your ambitions are. Ideally, we want to see a pilot report that contains assessments of survival and growth rates, challenges encountered, and lessons learned. And another key question is, does the pilot suggest, as I was saying, that the organization and partners deliver the volumes and the high quality grades that they are offering? Next, please. All right, as we move down the sequence or up the sequence, then we have things like having robust and conservative carbon projections. Having robust and conservative ex-ante projections is important not just because it is the core of the carbon business model that you are proposing, but also because it allows us to have some certainty about the volumes and delivery schedules, right? Like this is how much uncertainty there is or how well these models are built it's important for us to understand whether things are going to change too much or not. And obviously, we know that all models are wrong, but some are more useful than others, and some are more appropriate than others. And this is the kind of things that we want to see. We want to see carbon projections that are consistent with comparable publicly available data, models that use peer review and geographically appropriate allometries and wood density parameters, models that are locally validated and supported by other pilot data in the region or analogous reference projects. And although these can although some of these things can usually be fixed or improved in a relatively short amount of time, wrong model or parameter choices or poorly validated assumptions will definitely cause major delays in diligence. Next, please. All right, so implementation design, or intervention design here, you should say more implementation, I think. So project activities and interventions that are implemented according to best practices and considering local context. This matters because this is sort of like the fine-tuning of the decisions that you made earlier. Okay, so you have an agroforestry project. So according to best practices, that should be informed by science or by empirical knowledge from local partners, from staff, from landowners. So this is sort of like the high resolution management of those interventions. These choices matter because they will determine key outcomes from growth rates to leakage risk. For example, shade competition in agroforestry system. Are you pruning your trees correctly, or in silvopasture systems, or whether the interventions can deliver the non-monetary benefits that are expected by landowners, right? Are you using the right legume, like nitrogen fixing species that will actually improve productivity in agriculture? And that's what landowners are expecting from you. Um, Lastly, it's very important also to consider restoration supply chains, that they're aligned with the short-term and long-term needs of a project, seedlings that will survive in current climate conditions, but that may be resilient for future climate conditions, and seed sourcing that is responsible and that it's not depleting the seed bank in other areas. Next, please. Moving along, similar with dynamic baselines, these are, as I was explaining, your understanding of the baselines happens at the very beginning. It's a structural, it's not foundational piece of the work that you need to do. At that point, you know what your landscape, the dynamics of your landscape. But later on, these are things that can be managed a little bit because they will change over time potentially in the future as you are trying to modify the stocking index and as the science improves and as you learn more about the landscape. But by the time that we are approaching full diligence and eventually contracting, if everything goes well, we want to see dynamic baselines that have been built in accuracy, with adequate selection of stocking index and remote sensing data that minimize bias as much as possible, like adequate representation of the landscape, stratification and robust matching, and a credible additionality. And this is tied to what I was explaining. There's a demonstrated counterfactual threat to the specific land, and all these actually depends on how good your local knowledge is. You can have all the remote sensing power in the world and the technology, but if you don't have staff or the right knowledge of the landscape from the field, you're not going to be able to make that connection appropriately. All projects require dynamic baselines, including census-based projects. We are trying to push the market in that direction because it's really the only way that we can evaluate impact. Next, please. All right, and finally, but not least, MRV plans, and this is closely tied to the dynamic baselines piece that I was just describing. We want to see in MRV plans three main things. One is, conservative, accurate, and non-bias measurements. Again, this includes things like stratification and sampling density, getting that right. Uncertainty, considering uncertainty in field measurements, in environmental variability, in your plot sampling approach, appropriate stocking index, the resolution and saturation, geographic bias, or the uncertainty that comes with it as well. Transparent, so the MRV data is readily available for everyone to look at, and then reporting and defining and reporting uncertainty and errors really clearly. It's not wrong to have uncertainty. It's just that it's important to know what that looks like. And then comprehensive plans, right? Following target indicators that track the main non-permanence risks, ignitions, burns, deforestation, whatever it is in that particular region, and other beyond carbon metrics that support project integrity and durability. Should you be measuring for the structure and composition, right? Or doing farmer and community surveys about their satisfaction or improvements in their livelihoods. Those are things that support the ultimate outcome of the project. And with that, that's it. If you have, please, any project-specific questions, that's the email that you can use. And I want to thank you again for the time and for the patience here, and I'll pass it back to Julia.
Oops, I'm muted. So if the Symbiosis team can come back on video, and we'll see if there are any other additional questions. And maybe I can try to, one that we could, right now I see Ratnika typing an answer to, but maybe we can just answer live if you're open to it. Ratnika is, are you solely looking for developers to apply to this RFP, or are brokers, investors, exclusive partners invited to partake as well? Ratnika, do you want to go ahead and try to answer that one.
Yeah, great question, Valentine. We need to know who's the lead proponent. So we do ultimately only look at projects where the lead proponent is the entity that would sign a off-take contract with the Symbiosis buyers. But this, if this could be an investor or an exclusive partner, etc., it would depend on the particular structure of your project. The one restriction here that I would note is that we do not engage in off-take contracts with entities that resell credits. So if you're an investor partner or like another type of brokerage partner where you're not planning to resell the credits, then we would consider you.
Great. Um, can you please share the name of the paper slash author Paulo mentioned on afforestation? Maybe Paulo, you can, maybe I can, if you need me to go back to that slide or you know off the top of your head, that'd be great to share that again.
I can share it here in the answers. I have the citation here.
Okay, great. All right. Wow, we've answered 47 questions in the chat. Um, any additional questions that people have that they want to drop down? We will be posting this recording and the slides on our website under that sort of one-stop shop link that I shared, sort of symbiosiscoalition.org/RFP. And if you have additional questions, please don't hesitate to email the email on the screen. And want to thank you all so much for the engagement. Oh, question. Can we include soil organic carbon, SOC? I'm going to say we're answering that live. Maybe Paulo, you can take that one.
Yeah. Can you hear me here? Yeah, we do consider it, and we will look also into sort of like the quality about things, for example, like making sure that all measurements that are being proposed are in situ, right? Like no modeling approaches or so just modeling approaches there. We typically, don't want to see projects that rely entirely on that, on solid organic carbon. But the methodologies allow that. And so we just want to see a very rigorous quantification proposal for that, which again, typically, especially in forest systems, which are different, I mean, in many ways than agricultural systems, but especially there, they can be more heterogeneous, there's more variability. So we want to see that the proposal is addressing that correctly. But yes.
Great. Um, uh, Thank you so much. We are now almost at time. I guess one last question. We have one more minute, so I'll share this one. Ratnika, I see you're answering one question already in the chat, but here's one that came through to hosts and panelists. What about carbon flux sensing, Paolo? Can you share anything about that?
Yeah, I don't know. I wonder that refers to using tower fluxes, sorry, flux towers for measuring greenhouse gas exchange. Uh, I mean, I don't know that these protocols are integrating that into a way of MRB. That's an ideal, I think, situation, but it's expensive. But yeah, I don't know if I'm understanding the question correctly.
Okay, maybe we can follow up on that. If
Mhm.
if you want to email us that question, particular question, we can and clarify what you're asking about. We can try to answer that. All right. Well, thank you all so much for the time, for your interest in Symbiosis. We're really excited to see the projects that come through and continue to do the work of helping to grow this market. And thank you for all the work that you do, doing the hard work on the ground with communities and to help to drive more climate impact. So look forward to seeing the projects. Thanks so much.